Is you ready? Yes. Well, good
Two
afternoon, everybody.
seconds.
No. Oh, Jeff gave me the go ahead.
Okay, Chairman, the meeting's now streaming. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Natasha. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this remote meeting. It may be remote, but I'm sure our discussions will be just as good as usual. So first of all, apologies for absence, please, and notification of substitute members.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Fiona Baker and Councillor Ord should be substituting. I'm not sure she's arrived at the meeting yet, but she is subbing for Councillor Baker, and Councillor Wiltshire is subbing for Councillor Hopkins.
It's gone, Jeff. Sorry, the screen disappeared. Okay, thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? No? Shall we move on then to the minutes, please, which you will see from page 5 to 10. If I take them one by one, then we can call out if you need to make any alterations, please. Are you listed as being there when you were there? Good. Page 2, affordable housing. Information rights policy, quarterly performance risk and finance report, scrutiny annual report, review of the committee work programme.
Yes, Chairman, on that one. On the committee work programme item 63, it's said that I suggested that following the appearance of an expert on solar power, that they should the information should go to the working group. In fact, I recall saying that we wanted such a representative to come before the Scrutiny Committee to follow up the questions that we raised and didn't get satisfactory answers at the Planning Committee. This was suggested well before the COVID business, in fact, the January meeting of the Planning Committee. So a correction there, but can you also illuminate us as to when or whether we will see somebody coming from the Western Power to this committee? Thank you.
Leslie, do you want to say anything?
Yes, sorry, need to unmute. Yes, I can amend the minutes if everybody agrees with that. Regarding the Western Power, we did speak about this at the pre-meet, and we were going to bring it up in the under the work programme and topics, because it was something that was going to go to the climate change working group, and that was where it was supposed to be sat, but the chairman has requested that it now comes to the Scrutiny Committee. So we will speak of that under the work programme and get it added to the topics at that point.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. And we'll wait till we come to that, because I do want it to move forward with speed or pace, as they say now. All right, then.
So what did you want me to
yes,
amend?
I'm grateful. That would be very helpful. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, good. Amend the minute and we'll discuss it under the work programme.
Okay.
Coming up soon, right? Thank you. Moving on then. The last page. All right, everybody? Yes. How do one sign this remotely, just as a matter of interest?
Chairman, if you could, we will ask you to sign it at a convenient time. So we'll arrange for the minutes to be printed and for you to sign them when we're back in the office.
Right, thank you very much then. You'll be pleased to know, colleagues, I have no urgent business. Chairman's announcements, just to say this has been a very taxing day for me, one way and the other. I had two helpful colleagues here trying to get me online, as I failed miserably this morning and I failed on Monday, but I'm hopeful now that they've twiddled about and I've had to sign in and declare my age, which I thought was a bit rude. And actually I've now looked at it and I've made myself out older than I was, so not much hope there. So anyway, I mean, I hope this may be the last one, frankly, that we have remotely, because I do feel that if it's good enough for Parliament to sit and meet with a reduced number, it ought to be good enough for us to be able to self-isolate in our own council chamber with a small number of people as we are on this committee. But I wait with interest to hear from the local government association, the government, whoever else is going to tell us what to do. But let's hope that by September we will be able to see each other in the flesh, even though the backdrop where you all sit is lovely to look at.
Chairman, can I just intervene? What representations, if any, is this council making to the local government association in order that they can put pressure on Parliament? It would be useful to know, and this may be not the forum to ask, but since you raised the matter.
I've no idea, Richard, but perhaps this is something we might like to raise at the next council meeting on the 22nd of July. And ask, perhaps we might get some action, get somebody to write, the chief executive to write to whoever. Jeff's nodding at me, so that's always a good sign. So shall we think about that for doing something at the full council meeting? Yes, good, thank you. Right, so we've agreed all the minutes, so that's fine, and we've already moved on. So can we move on to homelessness and rough sleepers strategy? Jacqueline, I gather you and your colleague are going to do something for us?
It's just me tonight, Sandra.
Oh,
so
lovely, lovely, lovely. And you've got your screen to yourself, so what more?
Absolutely. So I've never used Zoom before, so you have to bear with me. I'm going to try and share the presentation. So you should have received a PowerPoint presentation and also a homelessness and rough sleeper strategy action plan progress tracker. Has everybody got sight of those two things?
Well, I haven't, I don't think, but I'm sure everybody else probably has.
Chair, I have read it, but
we haven't got it. You're all sitting quietly. Has anybody seen
Chair,
it? Yes.
Yeah, we have had it, but I've read it, but I haven't managed to pull it off.
Okay.
Right, okay. Well, Jacqueline, treat us as though we know very little, which won't be hard.
Well, I will share the presentation, hopefully. So let me share the screen. Let me know if you can see a presentation. Can you see something on your screen?
Yes, yes.
Does it say homeless and rough sleeper strategy?
Yes.
Fantastic, it's working. Okay. So anyway, thank you for letting me come tonight to update Scrutiny Committee on our homeless and rough sleeper strategy action plan. Just for information, it's not working on here now. So our homelessness and rough sleeper strategy was adopted back in July 2018. And then it was updated last year in November. That was part of a normal annual review, but also there was some new government guidance last year about rough sleepers. And so we reviewed our strategy and action plan to take into account that guidance as well. So in terms of the actual strategy itself, there are three key priorities. One is to prevent and relieve homelessness in the district. One is to improve access to services for people who need help and support. And also homeless households can access suitable temporary and permanent accommodation. I think tonight, although obviously I'm going to go through some of the key successes and maybe some of the risks and opportunities going forward in terms of the action plan, I think it's important tonight, based on obviously what's happened over the last 3 to 4 months in terms of the pandemic, to just give you some context of what the team have been doing in terms of homelessness and particularly rough sleepers over the last 4 months. And I suppose the key messages that I really want to bring forward tonight really is that rough sleeping and homelessness was one of the key, or was a large component of the housing response to COVID-19. And I'm sure you saw quite a lot of information from MHCLG about local authorities responses to rough sleepers during COVID-19. With all the negatives with the pandemic, I think we also need to identify that actually the pandemic has really provided some really good opportunities for housing in terms of increased opportunities and improving working relationships. This is particularly the case with our public health and health services, and also some of the voluntary support agencies as well that help with substance misuse. And also, as we're all experiencing tonight, we're also finding new and innovative ways to engage with people, obviously through Zoom and social media. And that's been the same with people that the housing team are supporting, rough sleepers, people in temporary accommodation, or just generally customers, where predominantly it was always face-to-face. We're trying to find new ways of engaging and speaking to people. And again, although because of COVID over the last 4 months, we've not necessarily operated all times as business as usual, but I think the team have really continued to deliver the key priorities in the strategies and delivered, some of those actions in the action plan, which obviously I'll go on to later. But I think another key thing we need to bear in mind is that, the pandemic is not yet over, and we need to be aware that we don't know what the level of approaches, the level of need and demand on our services is going to be going forward. So the team are also working in terms of a service impact assessment to determine what will increase, what's increased over the last 4 months, decrease, and have certain groups maybe been affected by COVID, and is that something that the housing team may need to respond to, and obviously whether they're going to be change of demand going forward. So if I think it would be remiss of me, as I said earlier, to go straight into the action plan without just giving you an outline and some context in terms of what the team have done in terms of rough sleepers. And in response to COVID-19. As you may be aware, in March of this year, the government had an everybody in strategy. And this was the government's approach to protect and safeguard rough sleepers during the public health emergency, and obviously help prevent the transmission of the virus. For us, this involved a swift procurement of safe accommodation for all known rough sleepers. Luckily, some of them were known to us, and we were already accommodating them for a previous scheme called Cold Weather Fund. So we was already accommodating them, but there are a number of rough sleepers that came forward at the beginning of COVID-19, saying they were rough sleeping and needed support and some help. And so at S&C, we include the provision of temporary accommodation for all those rough sleepers that we were aware of, all those at risk of rough sleeping.
Excuse me, Jacqueline, how many are we talking about?
South North Hands, we have accommodated, and we accommodated 8. Right. And we've actually been able to move 1 person on since. So at the moment, we're accommodating 7, but we're working with them in terms of their move on plans.
When you say move on, I hope that doesn't mean going back onto the street.
Absolutely. I'm going to cover that later,
okay,
in terms
fine.
of our approach going forward. Is that okay? So that everybody was in March, very early days in terms of the lockdown. I think it's probably on the same day. But at the same time as the government announcing that all rough sleepers need to be brought in, all of our hotels and BA accommodation closed on the same day. And so there was quite an interesting afternoon trying to find suitable accommodation, because we had some people in Travelodge in Toaster. So to try to find alternative suitable accommodation for those customers. Okay, so in response to obviously the pandemic, a housing, homelessness and rough sleeper cell was established. And this begin at the end of March. And so this includes senior representatives from across Northamptonshire local authorities, along with colleagues from public health, NHS, the County Council, Commission and Services. And so this has been a focal point in terms of responding, not just to rough sleepers, but other housing related issues that we've needed to look into. And what I'll later on, I will just set out some of the key work that we have done in terms of homelessness as part of that housing cell. And this is it. So obviously part of that was a counter response to rough sleepers. And I will go on to that next of what we did, or what we are doing. So as I said, obviously back in March, we accommodated 8 people in South Northants, but across Northamptonshire, just to give you some context, there were 176 people that were street homeless or staying in a shelter that were accommodated in mid-March. So at the moment, as I said, I've got 8 people that we accommodated, and we've now got 7 because we've been able to move somebody on into the private rented sector successfully. So the first bit was that initial engagement and provision of accommodation. And then the teams obviously have continued to provide support with rough sleepers. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the way we engage with rough sleepers and our customers has been very different. In the early days, we weren't able to go and visit them in their accommodation, so it all had to be over the phone. You know, and some of our customers, and some of those 8 customers, you know, do have some, you know, support needs that, you know, and they need that engagement and they need that support from us. So early days, it was very difficult for them and also for the team, because, you know, the team are very proactive and always going out to seeing people under normal circumstances. We will continue doing welfare checks with customers, screening for any symptoms of COVID-19, and also provision of ongoing support and advice. And so every rough sleeper that we accommodated, as with most customers that we work with, have a dedicated housing options officer, so they had a single point of contact. And as I said earlier, in terms of that, the positive outcomes of COVID has been the coordination that we've had with our health and public health services, and also support agencies for those customers who may have some substance misuse. So we've engaged with that, and we've actually been able to deliver and set up much better and much more effective pathways, and working collectively with those agencies to provide some wraparound support for those customers. And, you know, I envisage, you know, that's going to continue going on. That's not just going to be over COVID-19. That's going to be the stepping stone for much more increased engagement and collaborative working with other agencies. And then the other part is process should rough sleepers refuse or have to leave accommodation. You know, at the beginning there were rough sleepers that refused, not in this district but across the district, and how would we support them, especially if they were symptomatic of COVID-19. So we did a lot of work with public health in terms of a referral scheme, and obviously keeping them involved and informed about where rough sleepers were, so there's that immediate response should any problems arise. So now, obviously, we've moved on, we're 3 months in, and the government has announced the establishment of a rough sleeper task force. And that's being spearheaded by Dame Louise Casey. And again, as we mentioned earlier on, the key message, and it's something that we're all wanting to do, is to ensure or try to prevent anybody that we've accommodated to go back onto the street. So that's the key focus of our, you know, of what we do next, really. So part of that is also, now we're able to see people, we're able to see a few more people and do more visits. We're working really hard with them to understand their needs, what their support needs are, and planning those next steps with them, so they can then hopefully secure safe accommodation longer term. But what will happen with they will have hopefully a wraparound support and partnership working to hopefully sustain their tenancies and sustain wherever they go, following on from moving on from temporary accommodation.
Jacqueline, if I may interrupt you please for a moment. Do these 8 or 7 rough sleepers actually have a connection to South Northamptonshire?
They all do. Yeah, they're all.
I'm just wondering whether some of them are hopping up from Milton Keynes.
No, absolutely not. They've all got local connection, and as I said, some of them were already known to us. There were a couple of people as I said, in mid-March that came to us because they were sleeping in a car, but they've all lived in and around South Northants for for most of their lives, so they're all known.
Did we actually refuse to help anybody who wasn't local to us?
No, we haven't refused anybody. We've not turned anybody away. Good. And also, but we haven't had anybody either that's refused accommodation in South Northampton. So there have been instances across the county, and it's always going to happen where some rough sleepers are very entrenched, and to go into a hotel or go into is something they just don't want to do. So they, individual local authorities will work with those customers who may have refused accommodation, where they've they've given them like packs to support them, like a sleeping bag and things to keep them going if they don't want to take up the offer of accommodation. But again, we've tried, every local authority has tried to engage with all rough sleepers to try to bring them in, and now obviously we're now working with them to think about actually what is the next steps, what are the move on plans for them. So as part of that housing, so as I mentioned earlier, at the beginning we did a piece of a piece of work that I highlighted earlier in terms of what we did initial engagement, how I was going to provide support and going forward. And now we're doing a new report or a second report following on from that to really set out a response across Northamptonshire, not just S&C, but across Northamptonshire, and what those transition and move on plans would look like. And at the moment, we've drafted some key principles that we think all local authorities across the county could adhere to. So as you can see on the second bullet point, it's got key principles. So the first one is about in for good. And again, it's going back to make sure people don't go back to the streets. And where possible, we engage, and every rough sleeper will be supported, provided with opportunities to end their rough sleeping in the longer term. So that's the piece of work the teams are doing at the moment. The second one is about multi-agency collaboration. Again, I've hinted on this in terms of the collaboration we've had with public health and support agencies. And so again, we were looking for the housing response to rough sleepers. It should be and will be an integrated one developed with multi-agency collaboration, and particularly with that emphasis of that health and social care to sustain tenancies and making sure people are getting the right support they need going forward. The third one is personalised support. Again, people, rough sleepers also need to think about what they need, what they want from their own future going forward. So to provide support to rough sleepers is sustain their accommodation and making sure this is as person-centred as possible and based on their assessment of need, rather than us actually setting out exactly what they need. Is for that collaboration with that customer as well to make. And then if we are able to support them and get what they need and want, then hopefully that will actually provide longer term sustainable for tenancies going forward as well.
Jacqueline, question, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we have any of our ones in South Northampton that have a link to the armed forces at all?
Of those who we've accommodated for rough sleeping? No, not that I'm aware of, no.
Right, okay. What about across Northamptonshire? What is the percentage of people who've served?
I don't know that answer, to be honest with you. It's not something we've actually collated any information, but I can find out for you.
Well, I just think it's quite interesting because it's well known that quite a few of people who are homeless have been members of the armed forces, and through mental illness, alcoholism or drug taking or whatever, they've had a very hard time. And I just wondered, it might be quite interesting because we could then perhaps garner more support for them through their regiments and things if people knew about them.
Absolutely. Obviously, within our current legislation, our current policies, we would give priority, quite high priority to veterans and people in the armed forces. But I'm not aware of, for South Northampton, the 8 that we've accommodated definitely don't have armed forces background. But I can see if we can get the information.
Well, I just thought it might be interesting because I think we do have a duty of care towards them.
Absolutely. And then number 4, the new accommodation solution. So again, there's a number of options which we're working with our customers. One is obviously moving into permanent accommodation through a registered provider for housing allocation schemes. Not everybody that we've accommodated would actually qualify for a register, not because they don't have a local connection, because there's other issues that they wouldn't qualify for the register. We're working with private landlords to try and secure a room or accommodation in the private rented sector. But we're also looking at potentially setting up a new supported housing provision in South Northampton. So for those people that, like our rough sleepers who are single, non-priority homeless, is to actually give them 6-7 months of intensive housing management support to get them tenancy ready, to get all their care and support in place for them then to feel much more engaged and feel that they can actually move on, they feel safe to move on and have the skill sets to be able to enable themselves to move on. And then the last one is change for good, and again is going back to making sure that no rough sleep, we try to prevent and reduce rough sleeping completely going forward, that we don't go back to the situation that we had 6 months ago where across the county there were a number of rough sleepers with no accommodation. So it's again looking at the longer term approach to rough sleeping and obviously utilising the lessons that we've learned during COVID-19 and changing our approach to how we work with them. Any questions on that? No? Okay, I will carry on then. Obviously, I
Yes,
wanted
please.
to, I wanted to just give you that context, because I think it's useful to understand once when we talk about the actual action plan and the progress of this. So again, there's been some real key successes in terms of the homelessness and rough sleeper action plan. You may be aware that back last year, or the year before, that we had to implement the new Homelessness Reduction Act 2017. And so that not only involved or required the local authority to work with customers for a much longer period. Initially, we only had to work with customers 28 days before they're in potential homelessness. It's now 56 days. So we're working for customers for a lot longer, but also we have to work with all customers, regardless whether they're non-priority or priority need. So again, that obviously had quite a big bearing in terms of the time and support that case officers had with each customer. So they successfully implemented that Homeless Reduction Act. And again, as we've always stressed, the team is very much about customer focus and trying to be preventative as much as possible. And so for example, all calls at the service receive a triage by an experienced housing options officer. And again, as I mentioned earlier, every customer, once they've had that conversation at the beginning, when they approach the service, that housing options officer usually stays with them and gives them the support right through to any outcome they have in terms of their housing situation. So, you know, there's a relationship that builds during the time when they're working with us. The team have reviewed the allocations policy just to make sure it's still fit for purpose and in line with any new legislation. So that was completed earlier this year. We've established a housing outreach worker who works in the hospitals. Now, she started with us back last September. So her role is to try and provide safe and timely discharge from hospitals. I think she, between her starting in September to April, she dealt with 111 referrals, and you know, so she is working really hard. So you know, it's a really good job. We've had some really good feedback from both Northampton General Hospital and Berrywood Hospital in terms of the reduction in terms of delays to discharge and not having that backlog that they used to have. So a really positive role. That's
Jacqueline, just please, can I ask a question? Just remind me, the
Yes.
outreach worker, does that person work also for Northampton Borough Council too?
Yes, she works across the 3 local authorities, so us, Daventry and Northampton Borough as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a joint funded post. It was funded through the CCG, and we at S&C host the role. So, you know, we line manage Helen, our housing outreach worker, but it's being funded externally.
And Jacqueline,
and the funding is continuing?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Yes, that's one of the things for future, in that we are now at the moment, it's a piece of work in place trying to find secure funding going forward. Now I'm in negotiation of speaking to the General Hospital and CCG as to whether they can fund that position going forward, because we all recognise it's been a really important post, and it's, you know, it has delivered results, especially for the hospitals.
Can I just
if
ask
that funding doesn't come through, I think we should know about it.
Okay. I will keep you informed of how that one progresses.
Right, Jacqueline, does she have any contact with the Horton Hospital at all?
Oh, she predominantly works within the Berrywood and Northampton General. I will ask her. I'm not sure she has.
Well, I mean, a lot of our residents get referred to Horton Hospital, but they are still South Northampton people. Not everybody goes to Northampton General or Berrywood. So it's just, I just am interested, that's all.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'll ask the question. Not a problem.
A third of our residents, I think.
Okay. And also the other key thing that the housing outreach work is doing, obviously, with helping people to help them discharge from hospital in a safe way, but she's also working with the A&E department in terms of issuing advice around homelessness and, you know, just some basic legislation of what the local authorities' duties are, and so they fully understand of what constraints or what we can do as well to support people. And now housing is part of the induction process for new staff at Northampton General. So hopefully, again, it's that really good collaboration and joint working to try and improve people's lives and trying to move people out of hospital in a safe and secure way. We've reviewed, as you probably aware, we have a number of temporary accommodation dwellings that we as a service manage. At the moment we have 15 dwellings, so we've reviewed the temporary accommodation. Earlier this year or last year we had a couple more, but they were quite expensive to rent, and so we decided to give notice on 2 of those properties. So we've reduced them by a couple, but actually we haven't seen a huge impact by doing that. And also we've also updated all our temporary accommodation procedures, and so that's being produced and implemented. So again, it's much more geared to making sure that the support that we give to customers who are living in temporary accommodation. Hello?
It's all right. Charles, we can hear you.
Okay, and then the final one in terms of successes, again, as I mentioned earlier, is our counter response to rough sleepers. And again, I think that's been it's been challenging, you know, and it's been difficult for people because we haven't been able to necessarily always meet people. But again, I think that's been a real success in terms of rough sleepers and our homeless action plan. So the work programme going forward, as I mentioned earlier, I do think we need to think about the impacts of COVID-19 and what that may mean on the service in terms of approaches and demand. So as I said, we are looking to do a impact assessment, and that's ongoing. We still don't necessarily know what we don't know all the facts and figures, but we know, for example, that the furlough schemes, is gradually going to come to an end. Is that going to result in more redundancies? And we also know come end of August that landlords will then will start being able to evict people, and are we going to see a big increase in people coming to the service because of that? So we just need to be mindful of what's on the horizon and what measures we can put in place, and think about it now rather than just reacting to it when it comes towards us. Again, I've mentioned is about the move on and transition for rough sleepers, so that's a big piece of work that's taken place for this team. Again, I mentioned earlier, we're looking to scope and pilot a potential supported housing provision for non-priority single homelessness to provide them the support for them then to move on more effectively later on. Again, as we mentioned, we're trying to secure the role of the housing outreach worker, and I'll feed that back to you once I've got some more of an update. We need to update our temporary accommodation strategy, but we need to do the review of our portfolio and those procedures before we did that. So that's the next step. It's a bit delayed because we should have been doing it now, but because of COVID and the pandemic, it has been delayed slightly. And then another big piece of work, again, it's been quiet over the last couple of months in terms of Future North Hands and the work that we need to do for the housing service in terms of when we get for vesting day to make sure we've got safe and legal practices and policies in place come the 1st of April. So those workshops and the timetable and the work programme that is now picking up as well. Just quickly go through what I foresee the uncertainties and risks. So obviously one of the things that didn't happen during COVID early days was that support for customers. We couldn't go and visit them, but now the team have increased, and fortunately I think we now visited everybody who's in temporary accommodation, and we thought that maybe they wouldn't be they wouldn't have coped very well, but actually it's actually been quite positive, and some really entrenched rough sleepers have really excelled and really enjoy being in self-contained accommodation, and actually can cope and and are really capable of moving on to permanent accommodation. So I think that's really important to highlight as well. Although somebody may be entrenched and been in rough sleeping for many years, given the opportunity to be in, having a roof over their head and given the right support, they do thrive as well. Again, facilitate appropriate move on, that's related to what I mentioned before. again, in terms of we have seen increases in people approaching the service recently. Now the lockdown restrictions are starting to be lifted. The number of housing register applications looks like they're increasing. It could be just a blip, it just could be a few weeks and it may settle back down, but that's, you know, that's what we're seeing at the moment. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's concern about increased evictions, homelessness, once other things, you know, once landlords can start evicting again. And again, as I mentioned, you know, we are likely to see people financially struggling if they've lost their jobs or they're on furlough and they've got a reduced income. And also the downside, the other side of it is that there could be a delay in terms of the new affordable housing provision as well, because we know, you know, developers had to stop on site during COVID-19 at the early days. So there could be impacts on that if we don't get that throughput, and obviously then we won't be able to nominate people on our housing register, so that could impact in terms of people waiting longer or longer waiting lists on the housing register. And that's all for me. Any questions?
Thank you then, Jacqueline. Any questions? Don't be shy.
Ken Pritchard here. With regards to the amount of homelessness or people being evicted, what sort of, can you put a figure with regards to how many people or families we help during the year?
Figure for during the year, I probably do have. I probably don't have it on me at the moment. What I do have though is a number of approaches that we had during the last 2 quarters in terms of people who've approached the service. I haven't got the breakdown in terms of those people being evicted, but I can get the reasons for them approaching. So for example, during January and March of this year, we had 151 customers, households approach the service. And then during the last 3 months, April to June, it was reduced slightly, but it's not unusual. It's 124, and that was during a period of lockdown. And we still had 124 customers contacting us and needing advice, support. But I can give you a better breakdown in terms of what those approaches look like and what they were for, if you'd like that.
Also, second question, does the borough have the similar sort of structure and policies that we have?
In terms of service supervision, in terms of how they work with customers, I think they are slightly different. Again, as I mentioned, we're very, you know, customer focused, prevention focused. And, you know, if somebody contacts the service today and they speak to an experienced officer, they will keep that officer right through their housing journey, if that's what you're going to call it, until, you know, outcomes are known. So there's that constant support. And as I said, there's that relationship that that can be built with an individual. So somebody knows the case. I think from Northampton's point of view, it was slightly more, obviously they've got a much bigger scale of cases coming forward, so it's different, but they don't have that. They have sort of different teams. You have a team dealing with like the triage when people first approach, then they have a team dealing with prevention, and then people go into relief if they need some accommodation. So they have different teams working with an individual. So a person could potentially work with 3 or 4 different officers during their course of time and being engaged with the housing service. Okay. So there is that difference, but there's difference in scale as well.
Any more?
Yeah, I'll speak. Following up what Councillor Pritchard is just saying, I mean, is it going to be difficult when we move into the new authority, different approaches by these different councils as to how things are done, and therefore what's going on here may suffer? Is that something you fear or think?
No, we are working with both Daventry and Northamptonshire in terms of service provision going forward, and how the service is operated, how we arrange it. And Daventry operate a very similar kind of service to us. So in terms of that prevention focus and having a customer working with an individual officer. So I think, and also we've got evidence, through shelter health check, which we have probably mentioned in other forums previously, where it's been really highly regarded in terms of the approach that we take and how successful it is. So no, I think I'm confident that we can actually deliver this service that we're delivering, like and Daventry on a larger scale. So I think it's definitely possible. You know, it potentially may be difficult because obviously it's a lot bigger authority, but you know, I think that, you know, there's definitely room for changing the way maybe Northampton operate and adjusting it slightly. Is there anything you wanted to add there, Jo, on that one?
In terms of the housing cell, so Jacqueline's referred to the housing cell, and somehow I ended up leading that cell for the last 3 months. But I must say that Northampton, colleagues at Northampton Borough have been very collaborative. We shared the work out on the cell, so each local authority is leading a different work stream. So the borough have led some work streams. They've shared information when we've requested it. I think it's showing positive signs of how we can work together moving forward to build the new unitary.
Good. Any more questions at all? No? Can I thank you then, Jacqueline? I think you're, everybody who's working in the team need to be congratulated on the good work that they've been doing, particularly over the last difficult months. And we look forward to hearing from you again before we all escape from South Northamptonshire. But I think, you know, working together for the new authority is something we've got to do, but I hope that the good practice that we've displayed here, and Daventry I believe are doing as well, will actually embrace Northampton Borough so that we can a good service to all the residents in the new unitary West Northamptonshire. We'll be able to achieve it, because we don't want our standards to slip, and we do have a duty of care to those particularly living in very difficult circumstances. So all power to your elbow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right, we move on then to item 7, which is the customer service improvement project, which is very good news. And I have the lovely Jeff sitting on my right hand side, and he's going to tell us all, but it is a good news story, isn't it, Jeff?
It is. Thank you, Chairman. I'll just seek to share my screen, which I can't find at the moment. Just bear with me, all members, and I'll show the screen with you in a few moments. This paper actually sets out, obviously, the further improvements we've made since we last talked to you just before Christmas. What I'd like to do is just go through those in a bit more detail. And I also know that Councillor Medina has made some comments by email during the meeting, which, if I may, I'll pick up during the presentation. So in the finest of fashions, I can't find what I want to share, so please bear with me and I'll find that shortly.
We could have some community whistling or something.
I would welcome it if the chair told some jokes at this point, just to keep us going for a few moments.
No, I think my jokes shouldn't be published.
Right, we should be able to do it now. No,
Jeff, would you like us to do the work programme, and then we come back to you?
Yes, thank you, please, Chairman.
Right,
Thank you.
right. Leslie, can we move to the work programme then, please, and then come back to Jeff?
Yes, we can do. Thank you, Chair.
Are you there? We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, included in your agenda, you have a copy of the topics sheet,
Yes.
which I hope everybody's had a chance to look at, which just has any updates that I have for you at the moment. And then I don't know if there was anything anybody wanted to add, or any comments anybody has to make on the topics.
Yeah, Chairman,
David, I'm sure you're going to talk about broadband.
Oh, I am. Yeah, very well spotted, Chairman. I think at the previous meeting, we were looking at Upper Hayford, which is in the 2% area in the district that isn't covered, and they were going to carry out a survey with GigaClear, I think they are, for
Yes,
about
they're working in our village.
how much. Oh yes, so they're about and they're out there, and they were that we were going to carry out a survey as to who would be interested and what the cost might be before coming back to council, which says, look, we were going to look at the costs of extending the broadband to the other 2%. Unfortunately, then the dreaded COVID-19 came in and everyone was in lockdown. So that survey hasn't happened so far as I know. Certainly it hadn't as of yesterday when I checked. But I think, as you say, they are out and about now. So I will give them a prod to say, how about doing that? But I think the idea was that one of the folks there was actually going to go from house to house with it to talk to them, because there aren't many residents in Upper Hayford, but they couldn't do that because of the lockdown. But I will pursue it again.
Right. Well, I think it's important. I mean, I'm hoping that where I live, it will be improved, but I was quite cheered thinking it was all down to me while I couldn't connect with anybody. But apparently our rector is unable to stream his live service from our church this Sunday on the grounds that he can't get a strong enough signal. So, and I thought he had God on his side as well. So we will see. Right. Anybody else?
Just the added complication, at Upper Hayford have a parish meeting, and in their wisdom, when they drafted the legislation that allowed councils to have virtual meetings, nobody in Whitehall had heard of parish meetings. So they weren't included in that legislation. So they were not allowed to meet face to face, and they were not allowed to have virtual meetings. I'm not sure how many of them would be capable of having virtual meetings, but so they've technically not existed throughout this whole time because they legally can't meet.
Yeah, well, I have Alderton, that has a parish meeting, so same applies. Yes, Leslie.
Chair, if Councillor Harries, if you find out anything, perhaps you could update me and then I can update everybody else. Would that be possible?
Yeah, happy to do that. I would say I didn't get, there wasn't much going on when I checked earlier this week, but I will check and I will keep you posted so that you can keep people informed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, if I can come in as well there, I have invited somebody from Superfast North Hampshire, I haven't got a name yet, to come along to the meeting as there's an action down there for me, and I'll continue to chase that.
Thank you. Good. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll put my hand
Want to say anything? Yes. Hello, Alan.
Hello. Nice to see you all. Right. It's in relation to the approved the 106 transport scoping document.
Yes.
In relation to local bus services. I'm pretty sure everybody's interested in that in relation to the elderly trying to get around South Northampton and the rest of it. Can somebody update me in respect of where we are with Stagecoach? Because I'm of the belief that they're running into trouble at the present time.
I think the 106 group has only met week before last, I think, and I'm not a member of that. So if anybody was present at that meeting, could they speak now?
Could I just suggest that, sorry, if we finish with adding topics to the topic list, if we go on to, there's 2 scoping documents also with your agenda, both connected with the 106 agreements.
Shall we talk about it then?
Yeah, did you want to finish with the topic list first and then we'll move on to the scoping documents, if that's all right, Councillor Walker?
Yeah, my apologies for coming in on that. I didn't realise he was doing it that way, but yeah,
no, that's okay.
I'll come back on it.
Chairman?
Yes, Richard.
Just looking at what's written here, it says a verbal update on the street lighting strategy on July the 8th, 2020. Well, that's today. I didn't know whether we had that.
Yeah, so I haven't actually heard anything. I did contact Jo Barrett. I don't know if she's in the meeting. I don't know if you have an update at all on that, Jo. It was to do with due to the increase in the amount of street lighting funded via SNC grant scheme, who incurs ongoing costs and responsibility? So do you have anything on street lighting at all, or would you be able to update the committee for the next meeting?
Yeah, we can take that away. As it quite rightly says, in the past, the community funding panel has funded community street lighting. My understanding is that we don't have any ongoing liability for that, but I'll double check. And obviously now we have a new community funding policy. So we will see what projects fit with that new policy and our priorities going forward.
Thank you. Can I just ask if Peter Rawlinson, as he chairs the grants panel, would like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I agree with Joe that when we've given money for the installation of street lights, the cost is normally picked up by the parish council and they preset for it accordingly.
Yes, good. David, you wanted to say something?
I was going to say the same thing. I
right.
mean, the parishes will pick it up, but
yes.
I do have issues with community grants, but I won't raise them here. I'll talk to Joe perhaps later.
Good. Excellent. Anybody else want to say anything else on the topic sheet?
The other thing was the... Sorry. Who was that?
Paul.
Paul Watcher. I was just going to add to the parish's comment. Certainly at Helmden, where they have applied for grant funding for streetlights, it is their understanding that any additional funding will be down to them. There's no suggestion that anything will be required from SNC other than some grant money in the first place.
Good. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Dannon mentioned earlier in the meeting about Western Power,
yes.
I don't know if we wanted to add this to the topic sheet.
Yes, please.
And arrange for, I think Jim Newton was going to look at somebody from Western Power coming to the committee. So I can put that onto the Western Power onto the topic sheet.
Yes, please. And I also have a meeting with Felicity, the climate change officer, tomorrow. So I'll ask her if she's got any intelligence on a name as well.
Yeah, and can I suggest that we go to the top and work downwards? We don't want somebody who knows next to nothing about it coming along,
No.
which one could argue, of course, dispassionately, that the person who came to our planning committee was somewhat lacking in knowledge of.
Quite right. Yes, thank you, Richard. Yes. So is that all right? We'll add it. And the other thing I would like to add to the work programme, if we've got as far as that, which relates to, is the question of primary healthcare services in South Northamptonshire, which I have raised before, and it came to the fore recently when the Towcester district councillors, and because a bit of it's still in my ward, met with the planning officer on various matters, and we discovered to our horror that we're not getting a medical facility on the Towcester extension as we thought we were going to be, and that £1.1 million apparently is going to be invested in the two existing doctors' practices in Towcester, which came as a complete surprise to us because we'd never heard about this before. As far as I know, there's been no consultation in Towcester or anywhere else, or even with this council. If Lisa is still with us, she'll probably tell you that it takes over 3 weeks to get an appointment at one of the surgeries there now. So with the possibility of 3,000 plus extra people coming on board, I don't know. So I want, and I did mention it at the Health 106 meeting on health, that I would want the chairman and the chief executive of the clinical commissioning group to come to the September meeting, if you all agree. And we need to, and it's not just Towcester, it's the road surgery. We know they've gone doing quite well in Brackley, but we do need to know what are the plans for health provision, primary health provision in South Northamptonshire, I believe. And I think it's an opportunity for us to actually ask about South Northamptonshire, because within the unitary authority they're going to have a lot of things to look at, but we need to bottom this out, I believe.
Well, I can certainly put that onto the list of topics, and I think once again that was Joe Barrett was going to
Tracy, I think.
Was it-
Tracy. Well, Tracy Hill was going to because apparently she's been dealing with some people, but I do not think this committee wants to be fobbed off with somebody who is not a decision maker. We need the top two people, chairman and chief executive, who actually lead the commissioning group in taking decisions.
Chair, I did offer to draft a letter on your behalf
Yes.
to those individuals to invite them. So if the rest of the committee agrees, I'm happy to do that.
Chairman, I certainly do agree. I think it's outrageous that the health service seems to have just worked, but it's like men in Whitehall deciding what goes on. This is men in, probably men in Northampton deciding what doesn't happen here. So yes, I totally go along with what you were saying earlier. As a matter of urgency, frankly.
Does the committee agree to that then?
Yes,
I agree.
Chair.
Thank
May I
you.
come in as well? I think
Yes.
we need to go in further than that. I think we need a hospital built in the area as well.
Oh, you'll be lucky, Elaine.
But you've got Daventry, you've got Brackley, but Northampton is getting rather filled up, and so is Horton, so is the JR. We really need a secondary hospital.
Elaine, if I'm not to put you off, but over 20 years ago, there were plans discussed about having one major hospital for Northamptonshire between Northampton and Kettering. And it was poo-pooed at the time. It's never progressed. And we are where we are. And I think, well, I mean, we can talk about it with the clinical commissioning group, but I think the chance of getting yet another district general hospital in Northamptonshire is very, very slight, because they want to move everything in a different direction now. Hence, they're talking about these primary care hubs. And as we're apparently going to be doing everything on video link now, so they needn't even put their hand upon your person. We are entering a different era, but you know, bring it up when they come and see what they say.
Yes, I certainly will, because if the Prime Minister's going to build these 50 hospitals around the country, surely we should be able to get something.
Well, let's give it a go. Anybody else want to add to the work programme at all?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I've just sent an email regarding the MK 2050 strategy.
Yes.
I don't know whether or not that is something we actually have the remit to scrutinise, but there's a lot of chatter across parishes, especially my end, Whittlewood Ward, about the impact of this mass rapid transit network and how development proposals. So I don't know whether we have the remit or to scrutinise the impact of what their strategy.
I think Andrew Hankin will probably put me right, that it was going to go to the Policy and Planning Committee at some stage. And also the leader was going to give us and invite some of the parish councils affected down the A508 in particular, including my own, to a briefing, and that all got put on hold because of COVID. But I certainly think we should be looking at it, because it's going to have a dramatic effect on this district. And once again, we have a very clear interest in it at this time. So we don't want to lose the opportunity of, I think, making some comments. So, Andrew, are you with us?
Yes, I am. And I would agree entirely with what you said there. It is important to us. And I thought that it had already been discussed in some form at the Planning Policy and Regeneration Committee, and that certainly is where it ought to go. So, you know, having a word in the chairman's ear, if you like, to say that they ought to consider it, I think would be useful.
Yes, thank you. And I think if we can encourage the leader to organise another meeting, well, presumably we can do it on Zoom now, for interested parties, because, you know, it is out now in the public domain, and I know people have spoken to me and said, what are you doing about it? And I have to explain that I personally am not doing anything about it, because we haven't had a meeting about it yet. But once we have debated, because I think somebody from MK 50 or whatever it's called would be coming to address the masses. So I think that's something we should perhaps pursue in some way. if the committee agree, that, I mean, it won't come to us probably, but that as a matter of interest for us councillors, we ought to be looking into it.
Okay, so that's not something that will go on to the Scrutiny
No, because
work
I don't think
programme,
it's
but it
in
will
our,
go to
yes, it will go,
PPRS.
yes.
Okay.
And a full, you know, a meeting of an informal meeting of councillors, I think, and parish councillors.
Okay, then, so moving on the work programme, I hope everybody's had a chance to look at that. We have got a few bits on there, a couple of things for September, and hopefully that we might be able to get some response from some other people to put on for September. Then the other two things we have got on under this item are the two scoping documents for the two working groups. So everybody should have seen the scoping documents. So it was for the committee to approve the work of the working groups and the scoping documents. So has anybody got any comments to make on these scoping documents?
Well, I think Councillor Walker wants to know something about it, don't you, Alan?
Well, I'm muted, yeah. Equally, I was going to advise that at the county council, the scrutiny committee there done a scoping exercise on transport and local services under the auspices of subsidies. So perhaps the working group might want to get in touch with the chair of scrutiny at NCC and find out the documents on that to add to what the scoping they're going to do on this.
Well, that would be useful, I think.
I'm also doubtful, in view of the fact that I was asked questions on that, and the reason I'm talking now is that I'm doubtful the way that certainly the major bus companies or transport companies are dealing with us in South Northampton or any rural area. I go so far as to say that the stagecoach withdrew from Deanshanger, and it was not through luck or judgment, but through one of my officers at NCC that we got the Britannia bus service to actually work with us to the surrounding parishes that I represent as a county councillor. So, I mean, I think if they get the outcome of what the Scrutiny Committee, the NCC, was all about, and then made some in-depth inquiries, because I will say Stagecoach are very good at sidestepping anything that asks them whether they're actually going to put a bus service in or take a bus service out. And
well, I think this is, yes, that's the issue that Dermot's had in Silverstone, I think, because they've had money and then they've withdrawn it and then they reinstate it and say, oh, yes, you know, aren't we good?
And I think it also ties in with the licensing people, the government licensing people that seem to be very, what's the word, blasé with as soon as a company comes along and says we can't put any, we're taking out a service from wherever, they sort of let them get away with it to a certain extent. Again, as I say, it's on our scoping. So as far as I would like an update regularly on what the bus services situation is going to be in this area in here.
Good, thank you, Alan.
Okay, so on the scoping document then, we have under witnesses experts, we currently have SNC planning officers, NCC officers and stagecoach management. So if we put the NCC scrutiny committee chairman on to that list of people to for them to communicate with?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll get that added in there then.
Certainly to communicate with, I mean, whether the scrutiny chairman there at the moment is actually aware of it, because this happened 2 years ago when we was getting rid of the subsidies, which all hell broke loose even down here. But as I say, as long as they can be reminded, certainly Democratic Services will pick it up, because Paul Hanson and James Edmonds were involved in both of the scoping exercises for the transport up there. I know that because I'm pretty close to them as officers anyhow. So
okay.
we want to ask Democratic Services more to the point than the scrutiny chairman.
Okay, I'll get that added to the scoping document. So apart from that, is everybody happy with the work that's been done so far on creating this scoping document? Councillor Harries?
Yeah, can I comment on the health the health one.
Yeah, if everybody's happy with the transport one, I'll move on to the health one. Is that agreed then? The transport one, and okay, so the health one.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, it's very good, and there are one or two. I don't want to get in too much detail, but I think we're in danger of looking at this of being overly strategic. I think when organisations talk about overarching strategies, it worries me slightly. I think we need to sort of drill down a little bit. But I mean, if I can suggest one or two very, very minor changes that will cover that. For example, under indicators of success, the final one that refers to produce a plan for allocation of Section 106 health monies. And I'd like to say, and the timely delivery of health infrastructure in South Northants.
Yes.
Because I think part of our concerns are there are specific projects out there, and I will mention Bugbrook because we've been trying to get this money out of the health authority for years, and there's only one primary healthcare place in Bugbrook. The Section 106 says that's where the money must be spent, and every time they come up with a scheme, the health authority kick it back. So I think we need to look at that, and maybe if the committee agree, if we can just say timely under that delivery, and perhaps under methodology where we say budget report which identifies specific sites, we put some reference to and what the situation is at each site, because I do think it's fine. We do need some strategy, and it does concern me that the health authority don't seem to have any strategy for dealing with it other than saying no. But equally, where we can drill down, where there are specifics, I think we ought to ask the question, say, well, why are you saying no? What terms of reference are you using? And how are you interpreting them? Because it just seems very odd to me how they interpret, how they see the rules at this particular surgery, when it beggars belief. Eventually they'll keep saying no until we run out of time and money.
Yes.
So yeah, sorry, a slight rant, but two minor amendments I would propose if the committee agree.
Yep. So that's inserting timely into produce a plan for allocation of 106 health monies and the timely delivery of health infrastructure in South Northants. And the other one being the budget report, which identifies specific sites and situation at each site.
Yes, please.
Yes. Is the committee agreeing with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Could I just, it's Ken Pritchard here. Could I just confirm something? We've over the past have actually got to the stage of 106 money being allocated to specific surgeries and so on. And I can think of the one in Old Stratford. As part of the procedures, can we actually define when, in fact, the CCG are going to, in fact, approve this money that's been allocated to certain surgeries for expenditure? And I think Old Stratford is not just one of them. I think there's other parishes where 106 money's been allocated for improvements in local surgeries, and the money has just been sitting there. With Old Stratford, it's been sitting there for 3 years, and it's £90,000, and the monies which will go through to a surgery are desperately in need for actually expanding, because obviously the population in this area is expanding.
Well, Ken, I think that's a very good question that you can ask when we get the chairman and the chief executive to come. And we need to hold them to account.
Absolutely.
Because it appears to me that some of the, have to be careful what I say, but it seemed like ad hoc decision making some of the time, rather than based on a plan that we know nothing about, which is probably what they've got, but we don't know because they haven't shared it with us. And I think we have a duty towards our residents as the local council to ask another organisation what their plans are and what are their delivery dates.
I mean, if I may, Ken's point is exactly mine.
Yours,
The same thing is at Bugbrook. It's gone on for
yes.
years, and I don't know what they've done at Old Stratford, but at Bugbrook, the surgery there have actually put in schemes and projects that they want to do, including improving access for disabled people and improving the disabled toilets, and they've been turned back at every stage. They put in projects that are costed, and the health authorities say, no, that doesn't meet the requirements.
Well, I think what we need to do is to ask our members to produce a list of things they want to ask about. I mean, I don't want to show our hand too much in advance, because if they see we're going to ask a lot of questions, they may not wish to come before us. But on the other hand, I do think these questions need to be asked.
Could I suggest, Chair, that once we have got somebody coming, that we could offer to give them a list of, once someone's agreed to come, we could give them a list of questions prior to the meeting, just so they're prepared with answers when they come to the meeting. We could ask.
I think they might change their mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it is possible. We can do that if you want to. Just
yes. Well, I mean, I think
an idea of what we want to know.
We didn't entirely show our hand, but we can show some of it.
Okay, so I can amend this scoping document so that on the first line, purpose of the review, to gain a comprehensive understanding of health-related 106 contributions in South North Hants and when monies will be allocated. I could just add that on there.
Well, it's more than the money being allocated, because apparently it probably is allocated. It's actually spending it, delivering something for that money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I think is
well, we could put when will projects.
Because the money is sitting in a bank account here, presumably.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's been allocated, but it hasn't been spent.
Okay.
So that's the nub of the matter, I think.
So did you want to amend this scoping document, or did you want to leave this for the Scrutiny Committee?
Question, people.
Well, I'd like the two amendments I suggested.
Yes,
I've put those in.
Yes.
And I take your point about that, adding something to that very first line, perhaps about so it says gain a comprehensive understanding of health-related Section 10 contributions in South North Hants, and how appropriate projects can be approved, or the process for
approved and delivered,
getting approval to appropriate projects.
Yes.
Because that's what baffles
So I'll
us.
put can be approved and delivered.
Yes.
Yes. Delivered. I like delivered.
Yes. Well, they can approve it as much as they like, but nothing may happen. Good.
Okay, so I'll make
that all right, Leslie?
the first one, and those other two amendments that David has suggested. And on top of that, is everybody happy with that scoping document?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's been approved. Okay, so that's it from me then, Chairman.
Thank you.
If we would like to go back to.
Yes, apparently he's all ready now.
Ready now. Good.
Yes, I'm poised. So Jeff, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for your patience, members. I'll take you through the report. I'm sure you've read it already, but I'd just like to cover some points again and also pick up some points we've had in the meeting. As you all know, since I last spoke to you, we've separated from Cherwell in terms of customer services. Both authorities worked very well together the second half of last year into this year to actually separate systems, processes and staff. And we actually separated at the end of March, which was a real achievement. And it was thanks to both councils that we managed to do that. Taking you on to performance, as you can see, it has significantly increased in the last 6 months. I think it's fair to say it's improved to what it should have been in the first place. As we all know, it wasn't satisfactory a year ago. And the mission that I clearly had was to significantly improved performance. And I think due to the fantastic efforts of the team, we really have improved performance in the last 6 months. And that's a real credit to the team, because at least half of the team have actually only worked for us for no more than 6 months. So that's been a real learning curve for them. In terms of call volumes, as you can see, they have dropped over the last 6 months. During the COVID crisis, we have seen a fall in calls. March was obviously a busy month because of the annual bills that went out and also the response to COVID. During March, April, May and June, about half of our calls was council tax, and a large proportion of those about extra relief for council taxpayers and customers who are looking to, you know, put off payments, extend payments. And also we've had a significant increase in calls about business rates. I'm sure you're all aware of the government initiatives to help local businesses. And I know that you as councillors have had regular feedback through the members' newsletter each week about the progress of the grant scheme and how revenues and benefits have made sure that that's been paid promptly. In terms of staffing, as I've just talked about, we're separated. Lockdown presented us with an immediate challenge because customer services is one team in the council that didn't have laptops. They had desktops, they had actual phones on their desks, whereas the rest of us had laptops and headsets. But IT managed to get them supplied with laptops and up and running with headsets so they could work from home within a few days, which was fantastic. And they've been actually answering phones and emails from their kitchen tables for the last 4 months now. And that's been going fantastically well for the team, which is a real credit to them. We do have a small presence in the forum. One officer does the post and another officer who is a supervisor, and they liaise with revenues and benefits staff that are on site as well. There's a small team of those. And that's really helped for flexible working as well. We've got some childcare issues from some staff, well, not issues, I should say, but they have childcare responsibilities. They've been able to vary their working pattern, work out of standard hours and focus on emails, which has enabled us to deliver good performance to that. And also in terms of the new starters, the last 3 staff to join actually joined literally as lockdown started. So we had them in the office for just 1 day after lockdown had started, and then talked to them from a distance and sent them away again. So they were actually coming into the office for 3 weeks from next Monday to have intensive training about revenues and benefits that's socially distant. So that will greatly further improve our answering capacity. In terms of focus, just like to go over the service improvement log, or SIL. What this is a system where we record the content of conversations and email with customers, note what the issues are, and we're starting to build up a database of what the issues are. That's only been going for the last month or so properly, so it's early days yet. We've just started talking to revenues and benefits in the last few days about how we can further improve processes, and picking up on something that Councillor Medina kindly asked about early on in the meeting by email. So if I may, I'll cover that now. The SIL process is actually just gathering the data, seeing where we can avoid avoidable contacts. I know that's bad English, and obviously look at how we can further improve processes. In terms of process automation, we're looking at how we can further publicise self-service for revenues and benefits. As I said, half of our calls are revenues and benefits. Customers can access their own council tax account, benefit claim, and also payment details if they're a landlord through the self-service system. So we're doing more work to publicise that with revenues and benefits. Also looking at how we can roll out additional self-service forms. It's also very much tied into the unitary work. And the reason why I say that is because Northampton Borough are actually looking at how they use robotics to do with customer services. By that, what I mean is later in their year, they're looking at how they can trial an automated response to some queries and see how that affects traffic, because a lot of queries we get are very simple and customers are, for whatever reason, unable to access the information directly, but they're asking quite straightforward questions. So as we go into the unitary, we'll have that knowledge from Northampton Borough that will definitely help the unitary once we go over to that next year. But it is early days with the SIL project, so that's about how we move forward with that during the summer, and how we improve things. The third and last section before questions is where we're going next. As I've alluded to, continuing to train the staff that joined us last. The next 3 weeks is an example of that. Preparing for a significant rise in demand later in the year. Obviously, a challenge for revenues and benefits is to see what to be done about recovery this year. Obviously, everybody's acutely aware that's quite a sensitive issue because of the financial circumstances that many people are facing. So it's something that will be approached very carefully between revenues and benefits and customer services, so that we can make sure recovery is at the right time and in the right way. And also we resource our response to that so that we can respond fairly and compassionately to customers who get recovery later in the year. Developing the SIL data further, obviously seeing how we can make better use of that, because that is based upon a form that's completed on our intranet, and it's how we can automate that process. And also we're working with the other customer services teams from Daventry, Northampton Borough and Northampton County Council about how we move into the unitary and how we make sure that customer service isn't interrupted. So I think as the year goes on, we'll have much more of a focus on making sure that on the 1st of April next year, when customers ring us, we'll be able to answer their query. We'll be able to answer their query by email. And it's not just customers that may contact us from an S&C point of view, but obviously we'll be part of a much bigger team. So it's how we do that. So I think in summary, tremendous progress has been made, and that's, you know, a real credit to the team. They've done a fantastic job over the last 6 months. However, it's accepting this is a journey, a phrase which I must admit I don't particularly like, but I don't know why I said it, but there you go. And it's actually about further improving, but because as you all know, and you know, thanks for all the feedback I've had from you at previous meetings, it is something we must continually work on and further improve about. So that's me. So I'll hand you back to questions.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Though it's a team, teams need to be led. So I'd like to congratulate you on motivation and urging them forward. And I think for the benefit of everyone, including councillors here. So well done. Any questions, please?
Yeah, can I ask one? Jeff, horrified, I think you may become a robot. A little concerned in that regard, in a sense, because most people who get in touch with you probably are not, well, some of them will not have the access to computers, therefore they are ringing up to talk to a real human being about a real issue as far as they're concerned. Will you seek to discourage too much of a switch to robotics? Future,
yes, I think, thank you, Richard. I think it is very important to stress that customer services is here to provide a service in the way that the customer wants it. So what we're quite clear and going into the unitary clear about is that we will provide service in a number of different ways. And when we talk about automation, and I think robotics probably isn't the right word because we all have visions of how that's going to work. It's about whether very simple, straightforward queries like how much do I owe, how can I pay, what the balance is, that kind of thing. If they could be dealt with automatically, then that could free up more time for our staff to help those customers that need the time and the attention, because we're never going to have a situation where we won't have customers that need to talk to a human being.
Jeff, can I ask then if this is the way forward, God help us, that the robots actually speak? Will they speak?
Yes.
Yes. Well, can they have a sort of a normal voice rather than sounding as though they come from America or an alien or, you know, something? You want a friendly voice, and if it's a friendly voice in an accent that people understand and it's normal for them, I'm sure we're going to get a better response.
Absolutely, and you know, I would like to say that that work is at an early stage, but certainly everything I've seen from what Northampton Borough are looking at, it is a human response, and where it's been tested in the background, it's actually difficult to tell it is an automated process. And I think we probably all deal with organisations already where it is an automated process, and we don't actually know that it is.
Yes, well, there's a very annoying lady from Amazon who keeps ringing me up. Anyway, any more questions from anybody? No? Well, I'm sure you would wish to congratulate Jeff and the team for excellent progress. Incidentally, as we've divorced from Charwell, I did see on my local news last night, and I suspect some others did, there's a great move forward, people, to have the one Oxfordshire unitary. Hallelujah. You know, obviously NCC are looking on with great interest, and the current leader doesn't think that they would want 2 elections. You understand, it would be too stressful for people. So democracy is going a bit down the pan in Oxfordshire, I think, at the moment, but we will keep an eye on it. So thank you. Now I have to exclude the public and the press and anybody else, because we need to discuss something that is of commercial information to us. So can I ask that to be excluded? And presumably, Natasha, you have to do your little knob twiddling, do you?
Yep, if members could just agree to that.
Yes, I hope they have. That some
Fabulous.
of them are nodding, yes. Or even hands going up. This is marvellous.
Okay, thank you,
Yes,
Chairman.
that's great.
I'll
A big wave from Dennis, thank you.
I'll stop the stream, and once it's stopped, I'll confirm, so you can
Thank you
continue
very much.
meeting. Thank you.